Part of my becoming who I am is part of this world experience of being able to travel everywhere, be able to see places right from a very young age, study and work overseas. And now my job is about dealing with international students, international institutions. I do a range of work. Traditionally, I've worked with pastel and with landscape. And at the moment, I'm particularly looking at bringing my artwork closer to my lifestyle and my life journey. So what I do within my life is strongly reflected within my art practice, and that's called visual autobiography. The one I'll be doing today is traditional pen and ink, but it's not so loose, it's quite tight and it's conditioned by context. And the context particularly for this is I draw on aeroplanes. So the technique is a response or responding to that extension of self into the plane. So as the plane moves, I move. It shudders, I move. The pens I use are Faber-Castell, I use Coptic pens. I tend to use a range of them. It's not the brand that's so important. They're accessible, they're easy, they're relatively inexpensive, they're permanent. Some of the materials will change the type of mark. So this one is a 1.0. So you can press it quite hard and it's a very strong dark line, or you can loosen up and the lightest touch and it becomes quite fine. So if you need a very dense dark area, and you can see that it starts to absorb into the paper, so it's kind of nice the way it just sucks the ink in. Or if you want to move to something a little bit thinner, do the very fine lines, or thinner again. And this one is 0.03. So you see the line almost disappears. It's also very nice the way that it just travels quite quickly across the paper and jumps across all those little bumps in the paper, which is called the tooth of paper. So I like a paper that's kind of thick because there's a substance to it. So when you feel it, it feels good. It's got a nice thick surface, and then there's the potential to move over the top, and it's kind of natural for cross-hatching then. So lines start to move in and out of each other, jump over the top of one another, and then it's also the potential for a repeat pattern. With the pens, you can see that the end of the pen is like a brush, it's calligraphic, and so you can do fine line, or you can use on the side, and it has this really lovely deep sharp edge and then a looser bottom edge, so you can play around with both of those kinds of edges. So that grey has a touch of coolness to it, and then this one you can see has a slight brown to it, very slight. In a composition of a work, you're making some decisions about what rises up, what lowers down. And if we do a series of lines here, sometimes they start to look like a landscape. So we can look at a space that goes into the paper or sits on the surface of the paper. This is the last drawing I was just working on, and I've just come back from a trip to Singapore. So on that flight there was this bit of a travelling happening here. When we place things behind one another, you can see that I've used a slightly warm grey at the back here, and then the cooler blue-grey here, and they lift up from one another. So the different tones of grey gives a sense of space. And then with fine detail, those little tiny marks that I do, they take the eye in further. So the viewer actively hones in on focuses on certain little bits, which means that if you're looking at the work, I think, the viewer will be engaging with different bits. It's almost rewards for looking. So a dialogue starts to happen between the mark making and the viewer. This is patterning, it's obsessive, it's all those wonderful things that I think are important in drawing, but it's about having the faith in yourself to just do something. You do have to observe the real world. That's part of the concrete world offers up all these wonderful secrets. And I think engaging in the real world is important, but also engaging in your own inner world is also important, because that's when perhaps there's the greatest freedom, where you're actually just responding to environment, to place, to conditions, to mood, all those things, and you become the main instrument of your art making or your design making. And every single way, once you hit that point, it must be original, because nobody else at any time could ever do the same thing. So originality is a wonderful thing, and I think that's where you find it.